So this is Forgotten Sea Virtual Fighter Practice, May 27th with the Donngal. All right, here we go. Admit all.
How much intro are you guys doing?
Very little. Letting everybody pour in here. Hey guys, welcome to Forgotten Sea Virtual Fighter Practice for May 27th. Today we're doing something a little different. So Catalina is going to instruct everyone on how to set your Zoom settings so you can get the full benefit of today's program. So with that, Catalina, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi everyone. All right, so I want everyone to go into gallery view. My internet is unstable. Did you guys hear that? Go into gallery view. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's going to be 3 dots up there. Go ahead and click those 3 dots and pin our video. Thumbs up when you got it. You guys good? Can you hear me?
Mine's already set up that way.
All right. So when you pin ours, up on the top, you should see where it says Catalina sharing her screen. And it gives you view options. Do you see that? Click on the view options and go to the side-by-side mode. And there should be, once you hit side-by-side mode, you should see a big picture of me and a smaller one of Donngal. There's a slider bar in between those. Slide that over to give you the 2 of us in equal on the screen. And that is in the chat. If you need me to re-pin it in the chat, I will, because I know sometimes if you're not in there, you don't see all the messages, so I'll do it again. And then I will hand it over to Donngal. Give me a second to give him the mic.
Is there a way to make this a bigger push on the full screen? There we go. I think that's what I need.
Okay. So, hey, Kian, can you turn the camera off? Because we're trying to do a side-by-side with 2
I can try. How do I turn the camera on? Yeah, he just asked me to turn the camera on.
In the bottom left-hand corner, Kian, there's a button that says stop.
Here, I got you. Here we go.
Did it?
Yep, okay, thanks, Kian.
No problem.
Hello? Hey, can you hear me? Sounds like it's really quiet. Hello, hello? Can you guys hear me right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Did you hear your son?
Yep, all right, cool. tilt that up just a little bit. All right, good evening, everybody. If you don't know me, I am Carter Roberts, Duke Donngal Erickson, and this class is about controlling a fight. You know, we always hear there's two things you need to do to win fights, right? Control the fight and make a pattern, break a pattern. And really, that's my mic drop, because that's like the entire class. Of course, it's all in the detail, right? So what does controlling the fight mean? It means controlling one or more of the specific elements of the fight. And those elements, I break them down into physical space, temporal space, mental space, and technique. And I couldn't come up with a good one of that had space in it, or I would have. It's important to know that you can absolutely control a fight without knowing exactly what you're doing. Just like you could make a batch of gravy without understanding the chemistry that goes into turning that flour and fat into a colloid. But the more you know about it, the more you can make appropriate substitutions in the midst of things and still end up with an acceptable product. One of the key things about learning to control the fight, right? It's a teachable technique. These are all skills you can learn. But in order to be able to use a technique, you have to be able to reproduce it. So take this stuff home with you, go to fighter practice, and one at a time at first, specifically work on learning these techniques and how to use them and then how to combine them and so forth. The key thing, right, so make a pattern, break a pattern, right? Everybody thinks about that in relationship to like what shot patterns you throw. But that really holds true for every one of those things. And we mostly already think about this in range, but the key to success in all of this is in the transitions, right? It's moving from one to the next and one to the next, and in those transitions, creating opportunities for yourself. All right, to start with physical space. Physical space, I break down into separately range, space, and size. Range is the most commonly talked about one, and using the very common SCA terms, A range for the closest range, B range, middle range, C range, longer range. And I also include D range. It didn't used to get talked about at all, but really the fight starts from any point where you can be struck. So from that longest range where with a step you can still reach your opponent, that's still a range. So you're not out of range until it takes multiple steps for you to hit your opponent or for your opponent to hit you. So definitions of range, I define range as, so a range is literally from where you are touching your opponent body to body up to the point where with your sword shoulder closest to them, your elbow is in contact with them. And that's about the extent of a range, right? And again, it's important to note that range is always defined by your sword foot, your sword hip, because that's the longest distance you'll be able to reach. B range is from anything just outside of A range to where you can just reach and touch your opponent with, again, with your shoulder fully extended, your sword shoulder, right? And C range is, let's say a shoulder, where you can strike your opponent. So, and then D range is anything that you can do while taking a single motion, single step, and strike your opponent. Beyond that, you're out of range, and so you're having to do something else first to become in range. It's important to note that range is personal, right? I don't have the same range that Damien has. Catalina does not have the same range that I have. You need to be aware of manipulating your own range and also be aware of where you are in your opponent's range. So, talking about range, there are two different concepts that we need to talk about. There's true range and apparent range. And true range is literally the physical thing we talked about. Where is your hip? Where's your arm? Where you're at? What range are you in? Apparent range is based on what your opponent perceives of your range. And that is one of the things that is most easy to manipulate. If I am in stance, actually I'm going to do this without a shield, but that's the way I have one. If I'm in stance here, fighting Catalina. Let's say we're out here at this longer range, right? And if I do something to take her attention and take this step here without really moving my upper body, I have not changed her apparent range of her view of me, but I've absolutely changed my true range and the shot selection that I have available. There are a couple different ways you can manipulate apparent range. Ronos is really great at that. Go watch a bunch of his videos because he does a whole bunch of stuff like really subtly leaning up into a shield and leaning out and doing that while he's shuffling his feet. So in the middle of all that, right, you're watching the distance go back and forth, but you're really watching, if you're not really paying attention, you're watching that change in relation to where shield is. In the middle of that, he's also changing his true range because he's changing his distance from his shield as he's playing with that shuffling around. Another person, go watch some videos, Duke Sean, and he spent an afternoon smoking my leg with this. But he would do what I would just show him with Catalina, where he would set up and we'd fight. In the middle of that fight, he would absolutely switch his hip out without me ever noticing. I would get back up to where I thought I was just at that, hey, we can relax now, and he would smoke me in the thigh. So, a couple good sources for that stuff. Next one is space. So I treat space slightly differently from range. And space is using the relative position of your body to your opponent to get offensive and defensive opportunities for yourself. On the offense, one of the key things is always keep your sword shoulder free, no matter what. One of the things that I like to do to people with space is, I will like just hold your hand like this, right? I will step right on their sword shoulder with my body, because at this point I've got her shoulder captured. So if she's going to hit me, she might have like a terrible hammer shot to the thigh. Everything else, she's going to have to go somewhere else first before she can hit me. And so that makes me way safer while keeping my own shoulder free to do kind of what I want to with her. So defensive, all right, so. Offensively, you can do things like that, and it starts to tie together with range because of that whole notion about where those shoulder circles are, just like Aggie pointed out in his class, right? An arm and a shoulder and a set of hips can only do so much. So you can bind somebody up. The other way that you can do that is if their feet are in a certain set, right? Right? If I step in a way that her hips are not going to, even if she turns those hips, right? Like Aggie pointed out, until she corrects those feet, she still has a very limited repertoire of shots that she can hit me at without doing something else because she's frozen her hips by making that correction. All right, so before I move out of physical space, is there comments or questions? And actually, especially if you have disagreements about any of my specific definitions, I'd really like to hear it because this is absolutely a work in process. So.
You can hear them, right?
Yep. Nothing on the chat?
Nope.
All right. So the next element that we control is temporal space. Temporal space is tempo, measure, and initiative, right? Tempo, that's a musical term. It just means the number of beats per minute, and that's straight up speed. Fast as a tool. But change-ups are also really cool too. Measure is different than tempo because measure is the rhythm of the beats. So you can have a very fast, you can have the same beat, you can play ballady fast, you can play it slow, doom, doom, tek, or whatever. But both of those things are things that you will see exhibited by your opponent, and you will find yourself doing as you're throwing combinations and even as you're stepping. You're stepping at a certain tempo and in a certain measure. And you can use that yourself to either, if you figure out the tempo, the measure that they are in, you can cut into that, or you can set up a pattern. You know, maybe it's just rhythmic, and then syncopate a little bit, and it's likely to keep, because they're probably going to keep their pattern of defense going that you had already established. And then initiative. It's really easy for anybody who games to understand the concept of initiative, right? If you roll low, so you go first, you're absolutely at an advantage, and if you keep the initiative, it's hard for your opponent to take it away. On specific discussions of this, I would actually defer to all of the period fencing manuals, because they discuss it better than I'm ever going to be able to, and in great detail. If I'm talking about it, I tend to use Lichtenar's, the fore and the knock. So in the before, right, you're there ahead of people, or in the knock, you're reacting to what your opponent is doing. You know, and it may be, you know, if you're like a fast gunfighter, you may choose to be in the knock, but you're still making a choice to let them go first. And if you don't guess right about what they're going to give you for a gunfighter shot, then you're going to be seen backing up on your heels and trying desperately to stay alive. Do we have any questions on that? All right. So, and then mental space. So mental space, for me, that's focus, intensity, and then I didn't have a great phrase for it. I bounced this off of Deep Uther. He talks about this, or no, this one was Sean. Sorry, his offensive mindset, and that kind of encompasses, for his definition, encompasses both the staying emotionally separate from the fight, so you're really paying attention to what's going on. You know, take the extra split second to actually see openings and strike for them, as opposed to just trying to guess what's going to be open and throwing for it. And it also sort of encompasses that at real high-level fighting, there's that sort of dominance game we can play. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, this is a sport. We're out there to actually try to kick each other's butt a little bit. So there's that. Focus, going back to the beginning, that's putting all of your attention on the fight, but not just a aspect of the fight. It is basically in such a way that you are taking in all of the information from all around you at the same time. And for me, that is both a mental thing and a physical thing. I spent a lot of time actually training myself to use my peripheral vision, and guys that fight me a lot, know that I do that thing where I like stare at the ground like I'm looking at their feet, and it kind of looks like I'm just trying to look you off. But really all it's doing is it's making me not stare at something so that I'm forced to use my peripheral vision, because your peripheral vision just doesn't lie to you in the same way about things like feints. And then intensity, obviously, that's just a straight up, projecting energy at your opponent.
Please talk a little slower.
Oh, sorry. You should practice fighting very effectively with and without intensity. Very, very calm, relaxed person. And if you just kind of throw a shot out there, and it's not about speed, it's about the intensity at which you throw the shot. And that's another great chance, right? It's all about transitions. Transitions create opportunities. And the last piece of this then is technique, right? It's the finally get down to the question that all the new guys want to ask way too early, and it's how do you throw that shot? And I mostly wish that they would ask instead, why did you throw that shot, or why did that shot work? Because I think the technique part is in a lot of ways, the least critical part of all of these things, but it does matter, right? Technique is how you move your body physically to accomplish your task. You've got offensive technique, which is how you move your body to hit a specific target, and you should practice multiple ways to hit that target, because you don't ever know exactly what shape the opening in their body is going to be, or in their defense is going to be, and you might be able to see it, but if you haven't practiced different techniques to get your sword exactly to that spot, then you still may not be able to hit them, even though you can see it all day long. You know, this for just the plain onside, right? You can roll them in, you can throw the outside, you can throw the one that drops that way. So practice them all, and practice hitting them with different parts of the sweet spot of your sword, because sometimes you need to arc around, maybe a stick defense or something, and sometimes you need to be able to drop your tip right into that little bitty hole. Going back to that, the clock drill, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, that Xerxes talked about. Defensive techniques are how you move your body to avoid being struck. That's shield techniques, zone defenses versus corners, out versus in, that kind of thing. Sword blocking, guards, stances. A lot of people change up their stances all the time because depending on what threat you see as the most viable, you may choose to just close it down.
Can I go through what shield techniques and find what those are? With the shoulder.
And then, obviously, your feet. Moving around in such a way that your opponent isn't going to hit you. Stepping out of range or ducking under shots. That's the basics. I was kind of hoping we could get a little more discussion going on with some of this.
So I have a question for you, Donngal.
Yep.
Did you place these in any specific order of importance to you? Or did you just kind of go through a list?
I think that I placed them in the order of how easy it is to gain an advantage by using them. That is my thought process behind it, right? The easiest one to picture with range is, like, unless people always fight with their shield here, right? People tend to fight with their shields out at longer ranges, and they close up their shields as the range closes to A, right? But because you be defense, start with just hold your shield out. Right? But when we're way out here, that is a great defense, right? If she lets me get to here and doesn't adjust that shield, it is now a terrible, terrible defense. Then she basically doesn't have a shield at that point, right? So you can do things, right? It's easy enough to, like, walk your opponent open. If their shield is up in there, go ahead and get close to yourself, right? If she's buttoned herself up, right, I can get some distance back out to B and open up slots that weren't there when we were right there. Or say it's a mobile fight in the field. Say maybe she's chasing me around and we're like bang, 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 or I'm chasing her and she's backing up, right? I can slow down and let her get away. And if I'm doing that, it is even less likely that she's going to make that adjustment right away, and those slots will open up for a couple of blows before she finally catches it.
That's a fair answer. You and I could probably argue about this over beer for hours.
Sideways too, so they can see it over there.
I would probably argue that the best way for a fighter to learn some of this stuff is to learn to control themselves first, right? Before you can control a fight, going back to technique. But I do like your explanation.
Well, sure. I mean, you have to practice the flat scent before you can throw it, right? And you still have to know these things to defend yourself from them. So
Absolutely true.
It's a little.
We got a couple of questions in the chat, though.
All right.
Yes, we do.
Right.
So the first question is regarding the mental aspect of fighting. Do you game theory your fight based on what you do know about your opponent, or do you focus on what the fighter is doing during the fight?
I guess I'd be lying if I said that I didn't pay some attention to historical trends. But I mostly try to be really, really, really in the moment. I am personally much more of a lizard guy than I am a Rolodex guy. You know, I just don't spot like real specific, hey, he just did that and that did, you know. I'm looking at spatial stuff and how they're reacting to things, and but as far as getting focus and that ability to really lock in, I will tell you, I was able to do it in melee a long time before I managed to get my head in that right space on the training field. And it's a lot about just like, for that, it was like treating the entire line across from me as though they were a single opponent, if that makes sense. So you're just fighting a big giant monster that has openings here, there, and there, and there. I'm not fighting that spearman and that spearman and that shield and that shield. Did that answer that question?
He said yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I have another question for you. So this is, I guess, to get clarification. The question is, I am unclear on how you mean measure. I get that tempo is how fast or slow the beat is going. I am unsure of what measure is in your description.
Well, okay, a measure is literally, it's a specific pattern. Like it could be slow, slow, fast, slow, slow, fast. But you can go slow, slow, fast, slow, slow, fast, right? Or hard, hard, soft, 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 right? Same measure, different tempo.
I gotcha.
Okay, so the next question. Do you have drills that you recommend to practice range, tempo, and whatnot?
I don't have specific range drills. That'd be good to look into. My understanding of that specific one was kind of backwards engineered, if that makes sense, from what I was already doing, what I thought I understood, and what I listened around the SCA to what other big brain guys are saying. I guess, if we're going to talk about any of it, so there's a specific drill. I mean, this is for sword shape, right? Do the clock drill, do the 6, right? And think about, for that offense, think about hitting that spot in as many different ways as possible. You know, it's not just one, and it's not always one, right? Hit that one with a whole bunch of different angles and with different parts of your sword, and hit that 2 that same way. And you're going to have to figure that at some point you got to do some body stuff, because if you're going to drop, you can hit somebody right in the face, bonk like this. But if you're going to hit them with your sword vertical into their face, at that point you have to get some hip motion in it, because again, arms and hips and elbows only do so much motion, right? And figure out what that feels like without injuring yourself, and make your stick to go into those places. Another specific drill that I'm not going to be able to do really well on this is a ducking drill that Duke-Con taught all of us way back in the day. I can describe it and I can show you the motions, but again, really, you have one person just with a stick, doesn't matter what it is, right? And they're just throwing shots at you, and you want to start like just barely like quartering through the head, right?
What am I doing?
No, I'm just showing
Okay.
about what the person with the stick is going to be doing. Is just throwing about there, right? And both onsides and offsides, and super slow. What you want to practice doing is, so whenever you duck shots, you ought to, if you can, always duck towards it, not away from it, because if you duck away from it, they can follow you and bounce your face off the ground, right? If you duck towards it, as soon as they miss, or as soon as it's touching you, it's already missed, because then you can just make it skate down your body. So start throwing that way. So just slow. So when you see it coming that way, the first thing you do is a small step, super, just because all you're doing is orienting your hip really towards where the shot is coming from. Your weight goes over that knee, your head goes under it, and you roll your shoulders.
Face on it.
Right. So, right. And you actually want to practice doing that only as much as you need to get out of that, because you are the most safe when your body is right next to where their weapon is. Because if it's like right on your back and they've missed, at that point you're basically controlling that weapon, right? If that's a spear or a polearm, but once you're here and you come up, you're physically, space, you're controlling that weapon without having to do anything else to defend yourself. Start shallow. It's the same both directions. It's out towards it. And you notice how I'm always rolling that outside shoulder down? Because that makes then a smooth glancing surface from your helmet all the way down your spine.
The other way on the watch.
This way?
Yeah.
All right. All right. And once you get more in tune, you can speed it up. You can start going slow combos, and you can start going deeper. So go like that deep. All right. But the key to it is getting your foot out and getting your weight directly over that outside foot when you go down, so that you are in an actual position to recover and take advantage.
You guys switch to the other 45. Catalina's actually blocking your leg.
Move over here.
All right. Go ahead. That was a little faster. Do it again. Right? Did that help?
Perfect. Thank you.
What else you got?
Okay. So next question is when to be aggressive with presence and when to be conservative. When is it too costly in energy and when is it worth it?
It is, well, it's always valuable, because if you practice it and get good at it, it actually affects how your opponent approaches it. So I don't like to always start that way, because again, I think a really explosive transition there is super, super, super powerful. Although it's super powerful the other way. I'll tell a story on myself about this. Years ago in I think the Waterbirders tourney at Lily's, I was fighting Duke Lycurgus, and we made it to the finals. And we started out, and it was a really high level, super intense fight, and we had some great passes. And we kind of separated and went back out, and I'm just, I'm like just vibrating with energy. And he throws his hand forward and throws what I swear to God is the slowest moulinet ever thrown in the history of the SCA. And I sat there huffing and huffing and huffing and watched it the entire time. And it came up and bounced off my face grill, and I was dead. And then, of course, him being like Curtis, he threw his helmet off and gave a great speech about how honored he was to be there.
Did they ask how do you adjust range depending on the height of your adversary? Has that already been asked?
No.
Okay, it's in the chat.
Okay. How do you adjust range based on the height of your adversary? Well, so both by feet, right? So you can adjust range just straight back and forth, right? You're keeping this, this is a straight up C to B to A fight, and I can move in and out, especially if they're not just as good at me as maybe fighting belly up or whatever. The other thing that you can do is, if you're trying to, if the question you're asking is maybe it's like, how do you adjust your relative ranges? That involves triangle steps like Aggie talked about. So when you start moving offline, it changes both of your ranges in a different way, or maybe not at all, right? So if she's standing here, right, or we're like really crowded up, right? If I step to here, I have not changed her range at all, but I have changed my range about to the middle of B because I've cleared my hip out that far. And that same thing holds true for long ranges too. So if she's way out here, we're fighting this kind of game, I can step to here, and I've hidden her hip behind her body, and I've stepped my own in range, so I've kept myself in range while basically taking her out. She's at a long C maybe at that point. Did that make sense?
Yes.
All right, so the next question is, if you've been legged, what do you do to control the fight since you've lost the footwork part?
Let me know when you're ready.
You have lost the footwork. That's only one of the aspects. You're certainly not going to be able to move in the same way. Some things that you can do. I tell, especially, and I should tell everybody this, but I talk to new guys about this a lot, right? It's like you get on your knees and your opponent starts crowding. The first thing you need to do is clear your hip out. Right? So she laid me. Now she's going to come in and crowd my defense all up, right? You're right. I can't move around to get out of this. But what I can do, drop that hip back, right? Now I have motion to get to targets all over her body, right? I can still control it to that extent, right? And I can control some more with a lean because she's not going to be able to come up over me. And by sitting and by raising, right? That's almost equal to that. The difference between A and B range is just sitting all the way back on your butt or getting all the way forward on your knees. Always free up your shoulder. Another question?
Okay. If you've been legged, was that it? If you've been legged, what do you do to control the fight? Okay. Then Emmerich says, I'd like a demonstration of your oval center grip defense theory.
Oval center grip defense theory.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really different from my here center grip defense theory. Unmute yourself. So are you asking about stance, or I want to know more about what you're asking?
Well, the guys gave you some crap last week about some of your tricks, and you do have a certain way. You kind of like tip it right up on your face, and you project the cone out down. Just whatever your thoughts are.
So I mean, they're right. Those guys fight me all the time, and they're top level guys. Some of the stuff that I do, there's an obvious bait built into that. It's no different than Alcineus and his tights. And showing that thigh out there. It's like people just want to smoke it. But he knows it and he's ready for it. And so depending on which of those, like, the foot forward, that one, ready to go thing, is a big one. I will tell you, I'll straight up give away some tells on myself. One, if you see me digging my back foot in, then you know for sure I'm probably getting ready to come. The other one is, it's a subtle, if you really pay attention, at least take a glance down and look at how I orient that front foot when I'm in that stance, because that's going to mostly inform when I make that jump of whether it's going to be a fake and I go this way, or if it's going to be a fake, because if my foot's really planted sideways this way, it's because I'm actually going over there, if that makes sense. Because you have to do, to make that super fast, I can't make it in mid-step, so I have to set up for it. So, if you know what I do, you can take it away from me.
Any other questions out there?
Do what?
I was asking the room if they had any other questions.
So you touched on it a little bit earlier about how you will consciously choose to syncopate your attack. Can you talk a little bit more about your thought process there when you're making a pattern and breaking a pattern?
Yeah, so my best example of that is, it's probably like if I've got a bread and butter shot. It would be the one where I get my opponent running backwards, and I'm chasing them, and I'm throwing a repetitive offside headshot. Very, very fast, very, very intense, right? I'm wanting to project absolute intensity and speed at that spot. I really want them thinking about it. That is, so it's layered. So the first thing I do, the first one I throw, I just want to see where you set your sword. Because people either block deep for those, or they block up here in front of their face. And I don't care which it is, but whichever one you do, the rest of those shots are going to actually really reinforce that that's the right one. I'm going to hammer on that, hammer on that, hammer on it. So if you're like right in front of your face here, I'm going to hammer on it, hammer on it, hammer on it, hammer on it. We're chasing backwards. And then we all wait for our opponent to hit reset, right? That's a terrible, terrible habit that we all have in the SCA. So this builds on that, and hammer, 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 about that much, and that's a syncopation, right? Just as, like I'm just about to reset, and then go back. And since they saw me reset, they almost always start to reset too. When I go back, it's anybody who doesn't really, really know me and practice for that, they'll reset that block in that same spot. And so if they started shallow, when I come back, it's going to be over the top. And if they were deep, when I come back, it's going to be into the slot. So it's a lot of like super, super intense, and then just a little pause, break the rhythm of that. Did I answer that?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Let me know there's another question.
Okay.
Do you have any tips on shield manipulation, either with range deception or actively manipulating your partner's shield to control openings?
I don't have a great unified field theory on it, although I do it. And a lot of it is a little more passive, right? I don't do mostly big shield snatches and stuff like that, but I will start crowding things, right? Because that changes what her shield does for her when she goes to move it, right? Just little bitty contacts. Or throw a shot and leave your sword on it while you're making transition to get to another shot. Those are mostly the kind of manipulations that I do. I don't do a bunch of huge hooks and things like that. Maybe if they're a center grip person, the one active one that I really like to do is getting on the boss and pushing it that way. Most of my control tends to be passive though. It's like maybe getting my shoulder up against it, or, you know, just my body into it right here because I'm controlling it with my body position. Yeah, just switch to the other side. Right, positions like that where I'm using both her shield and my shield to defend myself. And I don't know if you can see it, but just my elbows, I'm not manipulating it, but I put my elbow right against it.
All right, how do you get out of that?
Move your feet. Did that answer that?
Yes,
Yeah, thank you.
good question.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
I happen to know that you're quite handy with a greatsword. So when you have a greatsword, do you treat your controlling fight any different than you do sword and shield?
I am probably, if anything, I'm more formulaic about what I do with the greatsword. my best greatsword game by far is the B and A range, and so I work really hard to safely get to that point, which is a lot why you see that super defensive lean that I do. That's really, right, again, that's taking all of everything on one side with the notion that then I've at least got the read that I can get down to the chop, to the forearm, or around to the other hip. But a lot of that is like, once I get set, and once you let me cross your sword, right, first I'm going to get contact, or close, within a couple inches. Doesn't have to be touching, but I prefer actual contact. Once I've got contact, I'm going to push my sword, right? So that whole period manual concept of the strong part of the sword versus the weak part of the sword, right? In that initial push, I'm trying to get my strong into your weak. And once I've got that, I'm going to follow the sword back in, right? Which now gets me to the range where I actually want to be fighting that greatsword fight.
Thank you.
I like when I walk in the rain, pina coladas.
So reversing that question, using sword shield against a great weapon, how does that change your strategies?
Well, right, they've got range on you, depending already because of weapon size, but then, the taller and longer arm they are, they have more and more range on you. So you have got to get inside of your range. The big thing that really good sword or great sword or pole weapon fighters do that, if they get a guy running after them, right, they can curve out and then create openings for themselves. So I try to be super defensive. Maybe bait them something, like a leg or something that they really just want to try to hit. But while I'm doing that, I'm just going to approach constantly, slowly, like with constant pressure, but without hurrying so much that I put myself out of position until they commit. If I get them to commit to a shot, as soon as that shot's coming, then I'm going.
Okay.
Right? And I'm firing my body towards their center mass because I don't know which way they're going to curve. But if I go right towards the middle of them, there's probably still something to swing at by the time I get there.
Okay, thank you.
And it's important, right, when you're moving fast like that, you still want to try to minimize the size of your footsteps, because the longer steps you take to get there, the less you will be able to recover to whatever body shifts they've made while you're on your way in.
Okay, we have a
Right.
new question.
When you find yourself losing control of a fight and you aren't able to disengage, how do you best like to break someone else's control and reestablish your own?
All right, so, I mean, if it's a super fast guy that's just like got me backing up or whatever, if it's a Xerxes class guy, and he's running me around, he's throwing angles everywhere that I just don't want to, I'm gonna punch him in the middle of the shield a little bit. Just stop that. You're going back to that size thing. Big guys get to be big, fast guys get to be fast. It is not okay to throw your opponent on the ground, but a little bit of road is racing. So, and it doesn't take heavy contact, right? If they're moving around you, especially if they're taking steps, they're off the ground, right? So just stepping just right into contact with them as those floors are coming will take power out of that. It will probably cause their hips to shift and their feet to have to adjust to land on balance, and that gives you then an opportunity to break into that. If it's a tall guy, a super tall guy with a lot of range versus me, It's kind of like fighting a greatsword, right? You've got to work your way in, but don't rush it, right? I try to bait them with something that looks real so that I know where they're going to go for, and then just walk them down.
There was another question.
Okay. Did they get that one first before we move on?
Somebody says it's the Overland Fighting concept.
Also said,
All right, so if you've lost physical control of the fight, i.e. your opponent is too close, chasing you when you don't want to be, etc., what are your preferred ways to regain control? Oh, Faustus asked the same question.
Okay. Right, if they're chasing you, circle. Circle, circle, circle.
which
Yeah, that
direction
was
do you
it.
prefer to circle?
I prefer to be random. So many of my friends who are really excellent fighters and are really, really good and really, really analytical can spot a pattern in like 2 exchanges. So I actually spend a huge amount of brain power on actually being random.
That makes sense. Good stuff.
It's actually a good skill to practice too. Just practice being random. You know, every time you close, when you step out, don't step out the same way. You know, I came in this time, so this time I'll back out and it might be that way. This time I'll come in and throw it and I'll back out that way.
It's worth observing, though, that your grace, your mental aspect in the game, your mental control of a fight is competent enough, is experienced enough to be comfortable in a compromised position, to be chased, to release the control just long enough to surprise them when you take it back.
Absolutely, that's certainly true. But right, we're always playing a chess match of some sort, right? Whether it's shield angles or trading slots at each other, whatever. We're always playing a different variety of chess. This is just another board, and whatever your skill level, and your ability to overcome some adversity. This is like a super complex version of rock, paper, scissors, right? Because, one beats one, right? Maybe you can beat a rock with a rock because your rock's really good. That's still not the best way to win that fight. So, I think that's the problem with gunfighting, right? Gunfighting is relying on a very specific skill set and a maybe well-informed guess. But you're giving up control of all of the rest of the fight in doing so. With all due respect.
Okay, so we have a question. Can you explain rock, paper, scissors with resect to single combat as opposed to melee?
It was an analogy. I mean, sort of, right? Like, I don't know how you would get about that. I'm going to have to think about that. Ask me later.
Can you explain rock, paper, scissors? Okay.
He corrected with respect. Sorry, with respect to single combat. As opposed to melee.
Yeah, I'm seriously, I'll have to put some brain power to that. I don't have an answer now, but I will come up with something. So ask me again later. Sorry.
That just means we get another discussion with you later. That's awesome. Any other questions? Xerxes says yeah, but he hasn't said a question. So he says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you love Xerxes?
Like 7.5. He's pretty cool for a young punk, I guess.
All right, we actually have a serious question here. What are your thoughts on being outnumbered in a melee individually?
Xerxes wants to know on a scale from 1 to 10 how much.
What are my thoughts on being outnumbered in a melee?
Yeah, it looks like individual strategy. That might tie into your the earlier question.
So, I mean, circumstances matter. If we're talking about, like, so if it's a skirmish line kind of thing, where I'm locally outnumbered, but we're still basically squared off against each other, I actually don't care too much, other than the fact that I'm really, really paying attention to how much they look they're about ready to start running at me, because if they charge, you know, a couple or two of them or whatever, then at the charge, if I'm fighting sword and shield in that melee, then I'm going to move with the charge to stack them up to give them the opportunity. So hopefully they're slamming into each other and I get a chance to hit the first one for free and then move on to do something else. If I'm fighting spear and they're a mixed group of people, again, I'm mostly just watching to see if those shieldy people are going to charge. And I'm going to spend a lot of time jacking with the spear fighter. I'm not going to spend too much energy trying to kill him unless he's actually, like, effectively killing my friends, in which case that's different. But otherwise, I'm just going to mess with him and spend a lot of time to pick off his buddies. If it's more open field, I'm just out, if like in the middle of the field and a number of guys are chasing me down, I'm going to circle until I get one guy that I can fight, even just for like a blow or two, right? And then as soon as that advantage is gone, get out and try to reestablish that advantage. You know, because they're probably moving around in such a way they're trying to hurt me. So if I can get them to close enough that they've stacked themselves up a little bit already, then it's a shorter distance for me to get out to a flank where I've stacked two of those guys up and I've got, just for a split second, one guy at a time to fight.
There's another question.
Okay.
I know you're typically very focused, but in the event you've lost mental fights, frustration, annoyance, whatever, do you have a way to reset mentally either in that fight or before the next?
It varies. I mean, it's a thing for me that can absolutely sometimes be harder to grab onto than others. There's a couple ways. Either emotionally it's bad, or sometimes one of the most brutal things is just a really long gap between fights. If you're in a really, really big tournament and it gets to the point where there's like a whole, if you're at the end of your list and then you've got to wait all the way around for your tree and then all the way around for the other tree to call, you're sitting there getting cold. One of the things that I do is I do watch fighting. I'm not watching that to see what I'm going to do next. I'm just watching it to be engaged in fighting, right? And kind of like, as much as I will do is like, I'm kind of gauging like who's on and like what their tens are. It's like, some guys just like everything he's doing is berserk. Certainly I'm going to plan on that they're going to be berserk when they come in the field against me. But I'm going to stay engaged just by observing, watching the fighting. And if I'm a little down, honestly, just seeing some cool stuff being done is really helpful to my attitude. And the other thing that I always do, I hear a lot of guys say, specifically a lot of times about Crown Tournament, is like, I don't want to know where I am in the tournament. I'm just going to go and fight. I absolutely don't believe that's true. One, knowing where I'm at, knowing kind of what possible people are coming up, gives me something to engage in as I'm watching the fights. Because then I know it's like, well, it's either this guy or this guy, or it's these two, then face, so, out of those four, I'm going to come up against one of those guys. So I'm staying engaged that way. The other thing is, because of the way that our trees work, you're like 7 fights away from putting a hat on your head when you start the thing out. So thinking that you can actually lie to yourself and say that I'm here to fight, you can probably only do that for about 3 rounds before you're already up and in it. And now you're being slapped in the face with the big giant wet fish of, hey, you're now in the semifinals of the Crown Tournament, are you ready? Probably not, if your attitude was, I just want to fight. Don't lie to yourself, just face it. Which I changed the subject a little bit, but I guess there's that together.
I think we've hit our hour.
That was for Brady.
All right. So, any last thoughts before we call this to a close?
I don't. Remind me, because I will send you a link to the Google Doc of this class, which is a little more like, it's fleshed out more like a paper, so it's readable. And then you can post the link up, so if people want to take a look at it, they're welcome to do that. And the other thing is either publicly or privately, if you have specific thoughts or comments or disagreements with any of the things I've said, I'd like to know it, because like I said, this is a work in progress. I think it's a living document, and I'd like to continue to refine it to have classes in the future. So.
Awesome.
Why do you fight?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You're answering. You got it.
What?
Somebody asked, why do you fight? Much more cerebral. Why do you fight?
Why do I fight? I don't know. I just got hooked, 1,000 years ago, and I never quit.
It was Logan House.
To go deeper than that, right? So I fell in love with just the coolness of this whole thing that we did forever ago. But part of it was absolutely just the fighting. When it was like, the garb was worse, the armor was worse, everything, it was tennis shoes and mismatched hockey gloves and ugly green painted barrel helms from No Mountain and things like that. But it was still freaking magical, and a chance to get out there and just be and do something. Especially then, again, this is one of those ways in which I've changed as I've aged. Early on in my SCA career, it was probably the first sport that I was really, really getting good at. I was literally the worst high school basketball player probably in the history of Missouri sports. So I love that the contest aspect of it, which is funny because I'm also most uncomfortable with the mental stare down, I'm going to kick your ass aspect of this game, especially at its highest levels. I find it uncomfortable for me in my brain to look at my friends that way.
Do you still teach bottle jousting?
Do I still teach what?
Bottle jousting.
I missed that site up in Iowa, though, where we had the table jousting. That was 2 cafeteria tables and a 6-foot spear.
All right. I think that concludes our session this week. Thank you, Donngal, for hosting. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else has too.
Looking forward to having discussions over a fire with a beer again.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, Your Grace.
So I'd like to make a quick public announcement. So next week, Jay will be teaching a Pell Work class. The week after that, His Majesty and Sir John Boyer will be doing Army Command and Sergeant class. The 17th, we have a class being led by Pranos, and on the 24th, Hirsch will be leading a class on Greatsword. And I believe on the 1st of July, Logan and Ravaz will be teaching a class in regards to like stretching and exercises that can benefit fighting. So we have a nice schedule coming up for the future.
Seamus says hi.
And I will turn this over to Gustav.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Your Grace. Thanks, Catalina. All right. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you so much. And this will be posted on Matsu's YouTube channel probably very shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.